Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I was drafted by the Eagles when I was in college. I played a little ball in college, and it was good enough for me to score a decent draft in the NFL, and the draft paid a good amount of money, and the good amount of money was something that was inspiring enough for me to accept the offer, even though I wanted to play for the Cowboys. But I didn't got the Cowboys, so I got the Eagles instead, and I was being paid enough for me to forget about the Cowboys, and I later even negotiated to get the deal for me to consider them as my rivals. The game season started, and I was actually pretty excited to be in the green jersey and step into the gridiron and make everyone my biggest fan. I decided one thing to become the rock star of the NFL, and I never imagined the things to blow out of proportions. And when the time came, there was the glory of it all waiting for me, and things were big, and I didn't realize how big they actually were when I first saw what the perks of being an NFL player means. I was waiting in the lobby room of a hotel when a girl came closer to me and said, "I know you from somewhere." And I looked at her and she was pretty. And I remembered I was blank and I tried talking, but the words weren't coming out of me. And she said, "Tell me, where do I remember you from?" And I did not want to across a show off, so I said, "Here and there, I've been around a while." And she smiled and sat beside me and started talking to me. We talked for a while. And then she asked me to join her in her room, and I thought to myself, should I do what I'm about to do? Should I join this unknown woman in her room? And after thinking a while, I decided to let her go and went on to my room, and later from there to practice. Since the suite I had in the hotel was part of my accommodation deal, I was spending most of my nights after the game in there. I often saw the girl lurking in the balconies of the hotel, and I assumed maybe she works there or is acquainted or maybe even live in the same hotel. Or at worst, I thought maybe she was a prostitute trying to make her way into the hotel where regularly rich people come and go. But the last assumption, I never really thought about that but once, since I never saw her interacting with anyone but me. It was always me, the glances, the smiles, the hellos and invitations. It was all limited for me, and it made me feel special. So one day, I decided to go and ask her if she knows that I'm in the NFL, and she looked at me and asked me, "What is that?" And I looked in her eyes, and I realized she had no clue about who I was or what NFL was or any of that. So I was certain that she wasn't one of them who lurks to get with influential people. The receptionist of the hotel might have seen me chatting up with that woman, because the next day, the receptionist came closer to me and said, "You have to be careful about the halls, sir. They might be old and they might be dangerous. It's best not to involve or indulge with them." And maybe she was just wanting me to stay away from the girl. I later asked the girl, "The receptionist warned me about you." And she said, "She's had it in for me forever. Don't mind her. She's a silly old goose." And then smiled and asked, "When are you going to join me in my room?" I replied, "Soon if the time is right. I better know you inside and out before anything." And she said, "Just search Daniela, and I everything she would be." I went back to my room and searched Daniela, and there was a story about the girl who died when her mother left her in the lobby of the same hotel that I was in. Danielle was 5, and when she died in the hotel, and she meant to be an actress. This all happened in the 1920s. Next day when I met the girl, I told her I read about Daniela, and it was pretty sad what happened to her, poor kid. So I asked her, "So you wanted to be an actress like Daniela?" And she replied, "Maybe, I think so, but it has been so long since then. I grew up with no one in this very hotel, and now it seems to have become a part of me." I asked her name, and she said, "Call me anything." And we talked that night a lot. I could see a lot of stares in the hotel, and mostly the stare of the receptionist. And as I saw the receptionist, she approached me and said, "Don't listen to her, just leave." And I thought it was very rude of her, and I told her to back away from me, and she did politely, but she warned me once again. And the whole evening, I didn't even realize that I missed practice, and I was just talking to that girl. We went into my room, and I tried to get close to her, to hold her hand or her, but she would just keep her distance. When I asked what's wrong, she said, "Let's go to my room and be there." And I agreed, and we left from my room to her. Her room was at the 13th floor. I had no idea that the life went that high, and when we reached to her room, she opened her door and entered first, and then took off the gown she was wearing. And as she did, she called me closer to her. And as soon as I was about to step through the door, a hand pulled me back and jerk and power, and there it was, the receptionist. She pulled me away from the door, and I ignorantly shouted at her, "What is your problem?" And when she told me to look around, and I saw I was on the roof of the hotel, I asked her, "Where's the 13th floor?" And she said, shaking me and making me realize, "There is no 13th floor. There are only 6 floors in this hotel. No 13th floor exists. You would have done the same mistake a lot of people have done. Don't ever get involved with Daniela. She will always seduce you into following her." And I realized, and when she explained me everything that just happened, I realized the horror of what just happened. The receptionist saved me from what would have been labeled as suicide, and she pulled me back to the world of the living. I couldn't have thanked her enough, and I took her out on a date, and from the day she saved me to the day I am getting into the NFL Hall of Fame 20 years later, I still owe my success to that lovely woman who saved my life back when she was not my wife. My name is Amelia Bennett. I have been getting stalked for the past 7 years. The first time when I noticed about getting stalked, I told police about it, but they could find anything, and I thought that I'm imagining things. I was walking home from office when I first noticed someone following me. I turned around and no one was there, so I ran to my house and locked the door from inside, because I had no idea if he or she followed me to my home or not. By the next day, I forgot about it, and when I was taking a shower, someone started ringing the doorbell. I thought if I don't open the door, they will leave, but the doorbell kept ringing. I immediately got out of the bathroom, dressed up, and went to open the door. It was still ringing. I opened the gate in frustration, but no one was there. Instead, there was a small package on my door. After picking it up, I locked the door again. I opened the package and there was a picture of me holding a beer and sitting on the bar counter. There was a note inside as well. I opened it and it said, "You look hot as hell, my Amelia." I panicked. The incident from yesterday started to rewind itself in my mind. I immediately called 911 and reported it. They told me to calm down and they will look into it. For the next few days, there was no other package that I received, but wherever I went, I felt like someone's following me, and every time I turned around to check, I found no one. Few months passed and the police couldn't find anyone. They told me that the gift must be from someone I know, and I may have gotten scared by my own imagination. No matter what I do, I couldn't help but think that he must be around me every time. I could never see the face of the stalked, but sometimes I saw a guy with a plum jacket with a picture of Black Snake over it. My friends started to worry about me and told me date. Their solution was you can get romance and protection at the same time, but I wasn't ready to date. I started receiving more packages, and it all contained some dirty, cheap lines. One time I received bra, and the note said, "Your breasts would look amazing in this, my Amelia." His every letter contained the word "my Amelia" in them, and it was creepy. I was at work thinking about these things when my friend came looking all worried. They asked me if I'm okay. I told them about the situation, and their solution, as always, was to date. They dragged me to nearby coffee shop and we started talking about office and made fun of our boss. I got distracted from the stalker for that period of time. That was when I took a sip of my coffee and noticed it wasn't my order. I remembered there was another guy whose order was with me. I had already taken a sip, so I thought I should let it be. But my friends forced me to go there, saying the boy is cute. I went there and apologized. Surprisingly, he exchanged the trays without even saying anything. I was talking with my friend when one of them pointed, "Look, that cute guy is leaving. You should totally exchange numbers. Go and say you want to pay for his Americano." I denied, but they practically forced me to. I went there and asked for his number hesitantly. He gave it to me and left. We went back to work. Before leaving, my friends reminded me to call him, and I took their advice. I called him and let him know my number. I didn't know what else to say, so I disconnected the call. The following evening, I received another package with letter. I was distressed. That's when I thought of my friends telling me that a boyfriend can protect me. I dialed the number of that boy and started talking to him. His name was Daniel Park. He seemed nice, easygoing, so I started to like him. One day when I was leaving from the library, I noticed someone following me. I couldn't see him, but I was still terrified. I immediately called Daniel for help. He told me he was nearby, and I felt a bit relieved. When he came, I asked him to walk me home, and when we reached, I called him because I was still scared. I told him my story, and at the heat of the moment, I ended up having sex with him, and it felt as if I forgot about the stalker completely. After that, every time Stalker made a move, I called Daniel over. But as time passed by, I started noticing things about Daniel which were similar to the stalker. One time, while we were having sex, he accidentally called me my Amelia, but after that, he never called me that, as if he was being careful about it. Another incident that I noticed recently was when I was talking to him about Stalker. He jokingly said, "What if he is just your secret admirer?" I felt weird, but the thing that made me even more doubtful towards him was his handwriting, which was identical to the handwriting of the stalkers. Today, when I was in my garden, I noticed the stalker placing something outside my house. I hid and took a picture. When I zoomed in, I noticed the tattoo on the back of his palm. Daniel had the exact same tattoo. I called Daniel telling him about the stalker and asked him to come over. After that, I called 911 and told them about the picture of the stalker. Daniel was on his way to my house, and so was the police. During high school, our friend group was the most popular one. There were 6 members: me, Sophia, Chloe, Ella, Oliver, and James. At first, it was just me, Sophia, Chloe, and Ella, but then Chloe started to date James, so James and his best friend Oliver tagged along in our group as well. James and Chloe were the ideal couple in our class. They used to sit together, eat together, go everywhere together, and they even used to be absent on the same day. We were annoyed by these lovebirds. But one day, all of a sudden, James stopped coming to school. Chloe told us that he didn't inform her about this either. We went to ask teachers, and they told us that his parents found a note which said that he wanted to take a break from everything and will be back within a month. Chloe was heartbroken because she loved James. She started to stay silent, mostly lost in her own thought. We tried multiple attempts to cheer her up, but it was of no use. Gradually, she started distancing herself from us. Still, Oliver and I used to try of having at least small talk with her, but she managed to completely cut herself from the group. Days went by, and we started to notice changes in Chloe's behavior. For example, suddenly she would look panicked and start sweating, or she would sleep during the class and suddenly wake up as if she had just had a nightmare. We started to grow worried, so we asked her. Olivia approached her first, saying, "Hey Chloe, can we talk to you for a minute?" She nodded, and I said, "Listen, we are worried about you, and if anything is bothering you, you know you can talk to us, right?" She looked at us and said, while faking a smile, "Yes, of course, and no, don't worry, I'm all right." She left after saying that. We could tell that something was wrong with her. We just did not know what and how to help her. After a few days, when we were leaving after school, a girl named Kara fell from the top floor of our school building. Everyone started to scream. The teachers came and called an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, she died. The school declared it an accident, but Kara's parents insisted on an investigation. So the investigation started. It was found that the last dialed number on Kara's phone was Chloe's. Chloe was called for questioning, but she denied it, saying she promised to meet her, but before they could meet, she died. Other students who were close to Kara were called in for questioning. They told the police that they did see Kara approaching Chloe sometimes. I remember that before James left school, he also saw Kara coming to Chloe once and handing her something, but Chloe threw it without even seeing it. They checked the CCTV installed near the stairs, and Chloe was seen going toward the terrace. Chloe became the main suspect and was called again for questioning. She kept denying about killing Kara. She eventually broke down and started crying. "I did not kill her. I was only trying to ask her about James," she said while sobbing. She told the police about what happened before Kara's death and after James's disappearance. 2 days after James stopped coming to school, Chloe found a picture of James. He was unconscious. His legs and hands were tied. Chloe panicked and decided to report this and put the picture in her locker. When she checked again, the picture wasn't there, but instead there was a note saying, "Don't try to act over smart by telling this to anyone." Chloe got scared and did not tell anyone. The next day, she found a package which contained part of James's finger, and there was a note, "A gift for you." Chloe screamed and threw it. She started to have nightmares about it. The notes kept coming with instructions written over it. The note also threatened her that if she tells anyone, the rest of her friends, along with James, will die. That was the time when she started to distance herself from us. She received a flower along with the note, which was delivered at her address. The note said, "If you want me to spare James, accept my love." The next day, Kara asked Chloe out, but Chloe was too panicked from all those anonymous letters and threats that she instantly refused. That night, before school was about to end, she received a call from Kara asking her to come to the rooftop if she wants to know about James. And when Chloe went there, Kara revealed it was her sending the threat messages all along. Kara told her that she was in love with her and often stalked her. She also found out combination codes for her locker and put a letter to confess her feelings. But Chloe never saw the letter. And one day, she announced dating James. Kara felt heartbroken and decided to end her life, but could not. And one day, she decided she would confess her feelings no matter what. She wrote a letter and handed it to Chloe, but Chloe threw it without even checking. When Chloe threw her love letter, it made her so angry that one day when James was walking home through a secluded area, she hit on his head with a baseball bat and kidnapped him. She put him on lots of drugs so that he could not escape. She then started to send Chloe anonymous letters. They started arguing, and when Chloe said she is going to report this right away and turned, Kara grabbed her by the hand. When Chloe was trying to pull her hand away from her, she accidentally fell. Chloe got so panicked that she ran from there. Police searched and found James in an abandoned building near Kara's house. He was on the effects of drugs. When he came to his senses, police questioned him and found that Chloe was right. After further investigation, Chloe was found innocent, and Kara's death was declared an accident. Let me tell you that I am a prisoner and I am in jail. I was charged with the murder of my husband, and I accept it. I don't feel any regret in doing so, as he was a maniac and he deserved this. I killed him with my own hands, and after that, I surrendered to the cops. Most of you were thinking why I killed him. Just listen to my story from the start and you will know this. I was married to a couple of heavy alcoholic business freaks who was habitual to drinking. Since he was my father's business partner, there was no point in my choice and my own decisions. Just after my graduation, I got the bad news that he had selected a boy, and after 3 months, I was married to that freak. He was a complete monster in bed, and I knew this on my first day after marriage. He made me scream and cry with pain just to fulfill his satisfaction. I begged him, but he tortured me mercilessly. I could think of nothing but only how someone could do this to her own wife. After that day, I was abused again and again, to my breaking point by my own husband. I couldn't bear his torture any, and just after 4 months of getting married, we got apart. I applied for a divorce, but he didn't sign it. It was not a big deal for me, as I had decided not to return to him ever again. Soon after being apart, I got to know that I was having his child in my belly. I was pregnant, but being a mother, I knew that it was not his or her fault, so I decided to give birth to him and live with him happily. After 9 months, I gave birth to a beautiful and cute baby girl. I knew that if he would know about this, there was no way he was going to accept her as his child, but neither was I going to tell him. We have divorced already, at least from my side, and that was enough for me. I raised my baby to be a nice young girl, and everything was good until she turned 16. In all these years, I had never heard about him, and neither did I want to. But that was my biggest mistake, to think that he had left me alone. It was winter, and it was too cold outside, so everyone used to go to bed early, and our house was not connected to any of our neighbors. One day, he returned to me again, but this time as a totally different person. I was fooled by his words and fell into his trap. I accepted him by giving him mercy, but on the same day, he showed his true colors. He returned home like before in a completely drunk condition. I couldn't let him see my daughter in this condition, so I asked my daughter to go into her room. But he was a maniac and alcoholic. He came to me and started beating me and abusing me. I was crying and screaming for help, but there was no one except my daughter. She couldn't see me in that state and ran to protect me, but she was not aware of him, and that was the biggest mistake she made. She tried to stop her, but he kicked her so hard that she fell into a corner and couldn't get up, but screamed in pain. He was angry with her, so he pulled me by my hair and looked at me inside the room. After this, he went to my daughter and raped her. He was a complete maniac, and even with her daughter, he acted like a beast. I could hear my daughter scream in pain while he was abusing her, but I was helpless and I couldn't do anything. All of a sudden, the whole thing was covered with scary silence. I shouted for my daughter and asked my husband to leave her from inside the room. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps coming toward me. I started begging him to open the door, and he opened it. I pushed him and ran to my daughter. She was lying on the floor and was bleeding. She was covered with scratches and brushes all over her body and was lying on the floor completely nude. It was his doing. The beast even didn't leave her daughter. I shook her again and again and shouted at her to get up, but she wasn't reacting at all. And how could she when she was already dead? She couldn't bear his torture, and it was all due to him. I looked at him with killer intention, and he shouted at me and asked me to bring a chilled drink for him from the refrigerator. I didn't say a word to him. I stood up, went to the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of red wine. He was sitting on the sofa facing me. The wine bottle was chilled and was making my hands numb. The drink inside was frozen, rock hard. I raised the bottle and hit my husband on the head several times until I could see him all covered in blood. I killed him with my own hands and then laughed out loud, but the tears won't stop bursting out of my eyes. I went to my daughter's body and I told her that I was responsible for her death and I was the one who gave him another chance. I should have killed him when he was doing such things with me, but I left her and let him kill my daughter. After sitting for about an hour, I called the cops and asked them to come to my house. When they arrived, they found 2 dead bodies and I was sitting there. They asked me, and I told them everything. They felt pity for me, but I had killed my husband. It was part of their duty to arrest me. I was arrested and charged with killing my husband, even though he was the one who killed my daughter. But I was not feeling guilty, and neither did I regret what I did. He was a demon, and he deserved his punishment. The only guilt I had was that just because of my little mistake, my sweet daughter lost her life. She had her whole life ahead of her, and now she was buried in the ground with all her dreams. I ask this question to my readers. What do you think? What I did was wrong or not? Decide this, and think to yourself what you had done if you were in my place. So I've been a football coach here in the UK for almost 30 years now. Once upon a time, I had a decent shot at playing in a professional level, and I even had trials at Man City when I was a teenager. This is before they had the oil money. I don't think I've gotten a sniff these days, but like so many other, horrible injury took me out of the picture, and I had to kiss my dreams goodbye. However, that didn't mean that I had to turn my back on football altogether. It's my life, always has been, so I decided to get into a career in coaching instead. A few years later, I'm working for Marine AFC on Mary's side, mainly along a bloke that had to be double my age. He had bags upon bags, loads more experience in bags, load more contacts, and one day, it comes to me with the offer of a lifetime. And it will made his somehow managed to land the head coaching job for the national women's team. Billy's trouble was he needed 2 blokes to help him out. He'd asked his mate, who in turn asked me 8 weeks after that. Following all kinds of vaccinations and travel forms, we were flying out to Belize City to become the official coaching staff of an actual national team. Granted, they just so happened to have never played a game before, but we saw that as more of a challenge than hindrance. But the trip turned out to be much more difficult than just coaching a few amateur footballers. In fact, it turned out to be a bloody nightmare for the entire time we were there. First off, and this isn't all that connected to the Belize thing, but our flight out of Belize happened to be on the 9th of September of 2001. So we spent our second full days in Belize, not maxing and relaxing by the pool as we should have been, but glued to the telly in the hotel bar, watching footage of the plane smashing into for hours. And if our flight had been booked 2 days later, we would have been in the air during one of the most terrible events in our lifetime. So to say that shook us up would be an understatement of the century. Anyways, the main thing happened about 2 or 3 weeks later, once we'd gotten to the swing of our coaching job. Me and my colleague from Marine were staying in a fairly scabby hotel in Belize City, but the food and the drink were absolutely phenomenal. And it was all being paid for by a football federation of Belize, so it wasn't like beggars were about to suddenly become choosers. The only trouble was that it could get a bit wild later on at night. I saw more than one older European-looking bloke going into a room with a much more attractive Belizean girl, then leaving maybe half an hour to an hour later. Sleazy, I know, but as long as they didn't put them near us, we weren't fast. And only a few weeks into staying there, I'm woken up in the middle of a night by a repeated rhythmic bang on the wall near my headboard, and suddenly, I know what's going on, and only makes me extra nauseous when I can hear some deep voice and American accent shouting all these pervy things. God help the girl he was with. I remember thinking, because she just stayed quiet as a mouse the whole time, and in the end, I ended up banging on the wall back and shouting, "Keep it down, paller," something of the sort. He didn't oblige a bit, not stopping, but at least slowing the tempo while keeping his voice down. Still grim, but better than nothing, I suppose. The next morning, I get a knock on the door, and it's the Belize police wanting to ask me a few questions. Of course I oblige, following the officer into the corridor. And that's when I see all the blood on the door of the room next to me. There are bloody handprints on the door. Blood all over the doorknob and bloody footprints leading away from it. The mad thing is, though, that would have all been cordoned off with tape in Britain. But the cops there just didn't seem to mind us contaminating the scene by standing right next to it. As it turned out, What had been listened to wasn't just, that the bloke had strangled some poor girl before doing that to her body, just feet away from where I've been trying to sleep. You can bet we moved hotels after that. About a month later, our women's team took on their Guatemalan counterparts in their first ever international football match. We got smashed 12-0 2 days later after we played El Salvador, and the results were much better. We only got beat by 6 goals to 0. The president of the FFB sacked us after our post-match him talk. We tried to explain that having the number of goals that we were beaten by was actually quite an achievement for a brand new team. He didn't give a monkey's bare bottom. He just wanted wins, so we were out. We flew back to the UK in time for all the Christmas typing. I just remember spending and trying to forget about the murder. The whole thing was definitely one of the most surreal times in my life, and if it wasn't for the actual murder that I tried to sleep through, I'd definitely do it all again tomorrow. This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares about not getting away. Let me start off by saying that I live in a pretty big city. Lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying and drugs. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. But I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with some friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with regularly, and the other 2 were more acquaintances. I was very outgoing and loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one. We were having fun and a great time when one of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get messed up that night. But my friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Bob, kept insisting I go with the 2 others. I kept declining, but she got a little aggressive. After the third time I'd said no, my friend came back from the bathroom, and Bob acted like nothing had just happened. Then we met some guys who joined our group to have a flirt, and I was in a relationship, but my friend and Bob weren't. By the time the second girl had left and Bob and my friend was starting to get pretty messed up, I went to use the bathroom and texted my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, but saw that my phone was dead. When I came back to the table, the guys had given his shots. I was still pretty sober and declined the shot, but Bob shoved the shot into my hand, so to avoid a scene, I took it. I then went to tell my friend that I was heading home, but I took one look at hers and Bob's faces and I could see they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself at that point, so I grabbed all our stuff and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting any resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab, my phone was dead, so no Uber. And I remembered putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping them off first, then going to my address. During the journey, I blacked out, but I remember dropping off my friend. Then I blacked out again and was alone with the driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around disoriented. I took in the sight of him holding my hand whilst driving, like he was my boyfriend or something. I saw my wallet in the center cup holder and the meter was off. He was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place, but I told him no, and to please take me home as my boyfriend was waiting for me. He then said something along the lines of stop talking about him. I told you, which in hindsight indicates that I had told him already many times about him. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I let my hand where it was and started to reach for my wallet with my other. He saw me let go of my hand and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach it. I was still woozy and blacked out again. And when I came to my senses, we were parked near a very well-known romantic and touristy location in my city. Normally, this place was packed, but not that night. It's pretty far from anything else and surrounded by woods. I started to cry and begged him to please take me home because I wanted to see my boyfriend and that I would tell anyone what he was doing. He looked at me and said, "I will take you home if you pretend you are my girlfriend for a little while." I sat there in shock, wishing my brain wasn't much. I wished, in fact, that I had never gone out in the first place. I wished I could see my boyfriend for the 1000th time that night. I said okay, and he smiled, put my wallet back in the cup holder, and I took it slowly, putting it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window and out into the little lake that he had brought me to. He then started talking, but I don't remember what he was saying. I was just trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again for him to please take me home. He said only if I let him give me a kiss. I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second, and then squeezed the hand was still holding. He then leaned in fast and kissed me anyway, but I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and not go down easily. He let go of my hand and backed away. Then started the car, and we finally began our way back to civilization. I was crying as silently as possible, trying not to be heard, so he would forget I was there and not touch me. I waited until we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. But I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next light. He snatched it again and said he would drive me. So I nodded, as by then I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I just needed to jump out no matter what, as I was going to get home. I had no clue what time it was by then either. But I do know there was almost no cars out of my usual busy city, no buses and no people. But I didn't care anymore. He eventually stopped at a red light, and I unlocked the door, yanked it open, ran, and didn't look back. But I heard a car peel out of the intersection, and he was running to my phone, still dead. No wallet, so no money, and really far from the house. I was still drowsy and crying, and I had no idea of the time. I started walking then, when I heard a car pull up near me. I started running instinctively when I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and turned around to the most beautiful person I have ever seen in the entire world, walking towards me slowly with her hands out in front as not to scare me. I started crying harder, being the most incoherent that I've ever been. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number so she could call him. He answered straight away, and she told him where I was and that I was okay, and she was bringing me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what had happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard. So we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better and drove off. It was 5 a.m., and I'd left the bar at 10. That's all I can remember a week later, and my wallet showed up in my mailbox. I had always been interested in the cultures and people of other countries and used to download apps that could allow us to talk to people all over the world. At the time, I was in the college pursuing my graduation from arts. My classes were only on weekends, so I had plenty of time, which I mostly used over the internet, talking to my friends around the world. One day, I came across an app, and its name was Bottled. It was a pretty interesting app. You had to write a message, placed it in a bottle, and throw, and someone across the globe would receive your message. I was enjoying it and making new friends. That was when I met a guy named Daniel. We started chatting. He was a pretty friendly and interesting guy. I became friends with Daniel, and we started chatting on a regular basis. After some time, we shared WhatsApp numbers and started talking there. One day, all of a sudden, he asked me, "How would you feel if someone pulls your hair by force?" I was shocked by the question, but replied calmly, I would hate it. I would want to punch that person in the nose. He sent some laughing emoji in the reply. His next message was, I really like you. Can I tell you a secret about me? I replied, sure, you can. I love watching people in pain. I was confused and shocked by his message. I asked him what he meant by that when he told me that he fantasizes about torturing people he hates with various methods. I did not reply to his messages, but he still continued. He told me about his fantasies, about how he wanted to beat up a boy he hated from college. He then told me how he sometimes even wants to murder people. After sharing me dozens of long texts, he asked me if it's right for him to fantasize such things. I thought maybe he's just lost and angry with the people who hurt him. So I tried to persuade him by explaining to him that no matter how angry you are, you should never harm another living being. And it's wrong to hurt others even if they wronged you. There was no reply for a few minutes. Then his reply came. Okay, I understand. I would try not to think about these things. I replied with a smiling emoji, and then we started talking normally. After a few days, when I came back from the classes and I opened my phone, I saw Daniel had messaged. He had shared me a picture. I downloaded the picture and it was of a boy who was brutally beaten. His eyes were dark and bloody. There was punching marks all over his body and blood was dripping from his lips. I threw my phone on the bed. I stood there frozen for a second and then went back to check my phone again. There was a message from Daniel. It said, "How is it? He is the boy who bullies me. I hate him." I asked him why he did that after I told him not to. He replied that it wasn't his fault and the boy started it by pushing him. He was going into the bathroom when the boy pushed him and cussed him. Daniel lost his cool and kicked him from behind, and then grabbed the broom from the corner and started hitting him. After that, he punched him continuously in his face until the boy passed out, and then he left the bathroom. He was telling me as if he enjoyed doing that. So I asked him to confirm. How did it feel putting someone through that? You know it's wrong. He replied, I know that it's wrong, but trust me, it felt pretty damn good beating his sorry ass up. I did not know what to say. After a while, his message came. I'm sorry, I know it's wrong. I will never do it to another person. It's just that I hate him so much. I asked him why he sent me the picture and he replied, I love you and I want to share my everything with you. I did not say anything in response to that text except okay. I did not talk to him for the next few days, but he kept messaging me every day. I saw the last message through the notification, which said that I should not ignore him or I will regret later. The next day, he sent me a video. I wasn't going to, but I opened it out of curiosity. I downloaded and played the video. There was a girl sitting on a chair. She was wearing a blindfold. The room was dark. The only light was above the girl's head focused on her. After a few seconds, a boy came from behind. He was wearing a mask. He removed her clothes one by one, leaving her only in her undergarments, and tied her hand behind the chair. The girl giggled, and then the boy started kissing her, through the chest to her neck. She started moaning. I thought he had shared me a porn. I was about to close the video, when the boy suddenly grabbed a pot from behind and poured hot melting wax over the girl's head. She started screaming and died instantly. It freaked me out, and I immediately closed the video. There was a message below the video which said, I imagined it was you. I instantly blocked him and started panicking. He was right. I was regretting it. I was regretting ever talking to him. I thought of reporting it, but I had no idea how. There was another friend of mine from the same country, so I texted her asking if she would help me report a crime. She agreed. I shared all the screenshots along with the video to her. The next day, she told me that she had reported the crime anonymously because she did not want to get further involved in this. After a few days, she shared me a news clip which said Daniel was arrested for the crimes of murder and assault of multiple victims. I uninstalled Bottled app from my device and stopped making more friends. Super Bowl is the biggest event when it comes to sports in America. The top player of NFL, celebrities singing their chart-burst songs, and the whole nation sticking to the television screens, doing nothing but watching a game and watching these halftime shows that took over the television for that event. It is phenomenal, as it is when it comes to these halftime shows on television. But when you are out there in the stadium with thousands of people cheering and shouting for their teams, and the group dynamic in the place is off the charts. I get to witness that dynamic firsthand when I was in the stadium during one of those Super Bowl events. It blew me away, and it was off the charts. There was so much fun in there, and we couldn't help but overstay as the events got over, and knowing that parking and getting out would cost us another 2 hours, we stayed still. As the game ended and the stadium slowly emptied, me and my friends decided to get back, and we were so hyped and pumped by what we have witnessed that we couldn't help but talk about it all the way. And as we were busy talking about it, we didn't realize that we had no way to get back but by walking. The public transport had been closed, and the only way that seemed to be reasonable was either staying in the empty stadium that was almost impossible. It was around 12:05 in the night, while my friends suggested that we should walk all the way to our homes, which was around 12 miles away. I thought it was a stupid idea, knowing that there is a massive patch of forest in the way that had been notorious for many abductions in the past, and I decided that we should not try to get into that trouble that we can clearly avoid. But they were adamant that they will take the way, and decided that it doesn't matter. We are 6, and together, no one can mess with us. And in that false sense of confidence, we decided that we will walk the way. I decided to put in the message before to my friends back in the dorm, just in case something happened. The first few miles were easy because of the after rush of the game. We even tried to hitch a ride, but failed. No one was ready to hitchhike the 6 young college students. And so we walked, not caring much and talking very loudly on the empty roads. We easily cruised through the highway without any fear, altercations, or bad experience. And as we were reaching the end of the highway, there was a feeling creeping in me, and it was about the forest patch that was going to start. And in the very beginning of the patch, I could remember that Langley kid who hanged himself to the tree. I even knew the tree. It was the 3rd tree in the right. And as I saw the tree, I remembered the image of him hanging. And then I remembered these murders of the Jones sisters that happened in the middle of the road, or how Claire was molested and brutally murdered in the middle of the very road that we were walking in. All these shit memories about the patch came into my mind, and they were not really helping me deal with the fear present that I was in. And as I walked, I started imagining things. I was talking to my friends. One of my friends had his arms around me, and when I looked to the right where my friends were, I saw all 5 of them walking on the right side of the road, but the hand around my arm was on the left side. And as I turned, I see on my left, I freaked out. It was the Langley kid. His neck was blue from the scar by the rope, and it freaked me out, and the fear just passed on to my friends, and they tried to understand what just happened. And they ignored me, calling me vividly imagining incidents. And then, one of them saw the 2 Jones sisters dancing in the middle of the road. And as we moved to the middle of the road, one was walking inside the forest. And I tried to stop them both, and they snapped out of it. And one of them saw the Jones sisters calling him, and the other one saw Claire calling him into the jungle. I realized what was happening and decided to act before they come back. And I told them all to grip reality with all their might. I said, these beings want us to slip away. Let's just hold on to reality as tightly as we can. And we decided to hold our hands as we walked. And to cut the way short, we decided to sing loudly. And as we did, we felt less scared. And that was the one thing that kept us going, singing. But the thing is, all the time we were singing, these apparitions were right in front of us, looking at us, staring at us, and grunting at us, trying to intimidate us into submitting. But together, we were strong and would just not give in. As we were walking through the forest singing, I felt the hand of Langley around my neck, and I saw that it was leaving the mark there. And he whispered in my ear, "You will have to come to us eventually, in the very way I did. Don't worry, I will be waiting, friend." And then he went away. and I remember every single apparition the boys were seeing went away. As the years passed by, we decided to forget about that incident. Super Bowl and NFL was something that we only saw on the television, and life went on to be that of living joys and sorrow, and it never came back to me. The story was almost forgotten, never to be remembered, until a few weeks ago. Then things got really rough, and to the point of no return. It was then when I decided to contact one old friend who was there on the trip with me, and we remembered that scary trip that we took, and I told him what happened on the final turn when Langley whispered in my ear, and he told me not to overthink. It was one of the moments of weakness in our life, but now I remember Langley was right on that horrifying night. Everybody in school knew Natasha was different, I suppose different as being weird. When you live in a town where everyone around you acts and looks very much the same, a girl like her would of course stand out. I'd have to describe her as a golf girl, if that term is even still used. Her skin had a naturally pale tone, but she did all she could to make sure it never got any darker. The Victorian parasol she carried everywhere with her blocked out any possible rays of sun from touching her porcelain-like skin, as if her skin and 100-year-old umbrella didn't make her stand out. Her choice of clothing just made her appear stranger to most. I don't think Naughty, as we called her, owned any color but black, from her coal-black hair all the way down to the tips of her patent leather boots. Only the chunkiness of her skin offered any contrast. If you were to guess that she was quiet and reserved, you wouldn't be far off. When she did speak, it was only in reaction to another's rude remarks. Even then, she was a girl of few words. She had a cutting type of wit. It didn't take her long to put folks in their place. Most people never got to see the other side of her. This version of Naughty was terrifying and most likely the cause of her future ghoulish behavior. Before I get to the meat and potatoes of my story, I want to warn my readers. If you are triggered or get excessively upset about the subject of animals getting hurt, stop here. Although I will try to be as family-friendly as my description is possible. Some things just have to be said. You've been warned. With that out of the way, I'll finally get to the heart of the matter. Despite knowing not everyone who looks and dresses like Naughty are capable of doing the things she did, I think that look was a reflection of how she felt inside. I would never excuse her behavior, but coming from someone who would know her rather intimately, she had to have struggled with that evil side of her. The Naughty I knew was an intelligent and sensitive person. Nonetheless, she harbored a deep-seated anger that drove her to commit a string of unforgivable acts. I never learned exactly what caused it, but I suspect it stemmed from some form of abuse she suffered. I foolishly asked about her grandfather on one occasion. This regular everyday question cost a 30-minute triad. Safe to say, she wasn't a good person. This is likely what led to her compulsion to have power over another living thing. I was already off for school for my first year of college. Nadia, who was a year younger than me, was a senior. We were still on speaking terms after a separation, but I had not heard from her for a few months. When I had a spare moment, I called to catch up. Her mother answered her phone and said this naturally surprised me. My surprise soon turned to concern when I was told that Nadia wasn't around anymore. I was shocked and asked what happened, expecting her to say that she passed. Miss Ellis Coley stated that Nadia had not died, but she wouldn't be free to speak to me ever again. Then she quickly said goodbye and hung up. I was confused and hungry for answers. So I called a friend who had stayed behind the work. The story I heard still chills me to this day. My friend's dad was a retired cop and still had a lot of contacts inside the department. I knew he'd probably know what happened. All of the details concerning her punishment were hazy, but the gruesomeness of her crimes were not. The story goes something like this. Not long after her and I separated, people's cats began to disappear. The ones that were eventually found, the bodies had been drained of blood and ripped to pieces. Initially, the deaths were attributed to a coyote or dog attack, with no blood found at the scene. The theory didn't hold up. A few of the wackier folks around town even claimed the deaths were the work of the chupacabra. A total of 22 pets will be lost to the cat slasher in all. Owners who had once let their cats out began keeping their pets in, and neighbors wanted their fellow citizens with distaste and distrust. Then, late one evening, the true culprit was caught in the act. A man was out walking his dog when he took notice of a car driving slowly up and down the street. It passed him several times, but he assumed the driver was searching for a particular address. This changed when he turned onto a new street and witnessed the driver get out and attempt to catch a cat. When the driver realized they'd been seen, they returned to the car and sped away. It was too late though. The man copied down the license plate number and turned it into the police. The crime that hadn't had much attention from the police until then drew much more interest when the car's owner was discovered. Natasha was no stranger to the police. She'd had multiple complaints filed against her in the past. Most were actually just baseless accusations from older people who distressed or simply because she looked different. She's a devil worshiper and other equally stupid fantasies. However, she'd also been caught shoplifting once or twice. Fortunately for her, she had some mysterious family connections that made everything go away. Things wouldn't be any different this time. Despite admitting everything to the cops that interviewed her, often in gory detail, she'd be let off with no repercussions. In fact, the press didn't even mention a suspect had been arrested. Despite knowing her name and all that was said, it was almost as if none of it had even happened. The disappearance has just stopped, and almost nobody even knew why. At first, I was in complete shock, but as time passed, it began to make sense. Not he had always hated cats. I never discovered why, but something major had to have occurred to cause her behavior. And before anyone asks if she took this dark turn because of our breakup, just forget it. She was more than happy to be free again. In fact, I may have been the only thing keeping her from going down that path sooner. For all I know, it had already started prior to our separation and nobody had noticed. I'm guilt-free, my friend. During my visits back home, the subject was brought up a few times. One guy even said he had heard she had been drinking the blood of the cats. She wasn't beyond doing something so crazy, but the girl I knew would have thought something so ceremonial was stupid. Through the grapevine, I did eventually discover where she had gone. Mere days after her release, she was shipped off to a mental health facility out west. What happened to her after that? I have no clue. Despite the terrible and cruel things she did, I still catch myself hoping she'll call from time to time. Mostly, I just want to hear her explanation. Whether I do or not, I hope she gets the help she needs. I'd hate to know more people's pets could be in danger because she couldn't resolve the problems from her past. If she does contact me, I'll post an update. Watch this line and stay tuned. I'm just as morbidly curious as you. Born on February 11th of 1860, Karl Donka grew up as the son of a wealthy German farming couple and part of what is now modern-day Poland. Little is known of Karl's early years, but it seems he was a quiet and soft-spoken child who fared poorly in social situations. It's unclear why, but at just 12 years old, a young Karl left his childhood home never to return, and nearby Monster Backney became an apprentice gardener for a while. But after deciding that outdoor work didn't suit him, he quit and worked a variety of odd jobs before receiving a sizable inheritance following his father's death. It was with this inheritance money that Karl purchased his first plot of land, having bizarrely decided to take up farming. As you can imagine, given the amount of outdoor work involved, Karl found that farming didn't suit him either, so he sold his land for considerably less than he paid for it, then continued working odd jobs around Monsterburg while living in a small house there. Karl did okay for himself. He was a popular figure in his local community and even played organ down in his local church. As a result of his staunch piety and generosity and friendly demeanor, Carl was nicknamed Papa Donkus by local townsfolk, and it became somewhat of a surrogate uncle for some of the town's most wayward youth. If you are in need of something to eat, go see Papa Donka. Need the bed for the night? Go see Papa Donka. Late on the rent? You get the idea. By age 66, Carl would become a pillar of the community. Everyone knew his name. Everyone knew his face. There wasn't a sullen monsterberg that didn't know his rosy red cheeks and wide warm smile. But the same face that everyone had come to love so much, it was nothing but a mask Carl wore to hide his true nature. Papa Denker wasn't the man that everyone thought he was, and his mask was about to slip. It was the night of December 21st, 1924, just a few nights before Christmas, and benefiting the time of year, Papa Donka's house was seeing increased traffic from the city's most vulnerable people. It was such a good service that he provided with that the streets being so dangerous. More and more of the homeless were going missing every year, now vanishing from the recesses they've been banished to never reappear. Some said the last place their missing friend had been seen was Papa Donka's house, but that made all the sense in the world. He was a charitable man. Many of the homeless darkened his door on a nightly basis. Besides, such a man of faith wouldn't have it in him to hurt anyone, would he? But that same festivity, frosty December night, a passerby heard something as he walked past Papa Donka his house, something that made his blood run cold. It was the cry of a man who knew he was about to die, a kind of blood-curdling mortal lament, the final sounds they might ever make. The passerby burst into Donka's house, terrified that the man himself might be under attack from one of the very people he was trying to help. But instead, the passerby quickly encountered a young vagrant still on his feet for a moment, despite his head just about being cleaved in two. When asked who inflicted such a terrible wound, the dying man managed to utter two final words before he expired: Papa Donka. Realizing he had stumbled into the den of the sinister and surreptitious predator, the passerby immediately fled Donka's home. He strayed from the nearest police station. Once Dinka had been arrested, a search of his house revealed the hidden identification papers of a dozen missing people, plus various items of male clothing that were so small that could be categorically ruled out as belonging to Donka. The by far the most disturbing and incriminating discovery was to be made in Papa Donka's kitchen. Police looked into two large vinegar barrels, each containing large chunks of what looked a lot like pork. Dinka seemed to be in the process of pickling some gammon for the winter. At least, the police were hoping it was gammon. Yet, when they discovered the butcher corpses of up to 30 of Donka's victims, it became clear the Monsterburg police had a cannibal on their hands. What's more, Donka had made the mistakes of writing down the names and ages of his victims in a small notebook. Along with the dates of their murderers and the parts of their corpses, he was pickling. The scope and scale of his operation was horrifyingly clear, and it's obvious that the pickling process was intended to allow Donker to savor his victims for months to come. But the questions are what made the man so deranged in the first place, and why he was compelled not only to kill, but consume the bodies of his victims. These police were anxious to answer. Unfortunately, they never got the chance, as Papa Donka would use a secret ID handkerchief to hang himself in his cell on the very first night of his arrest. He was obviously deeply ashamed of his actions and was unable to face the backlash and consequences of those. But just how much Donka had to be ashamed of was just only revealed after his death. It turned out that not only had Papa Donka pickled and eaten his poor vagrant victims, it also fed other people that remains. The vast majority of the homeless folk who visited Papa Donka were given small jars of what he called pickled pork, small, highly nutritious chunks of protein that could last Monsterburg's hungry for a considerably long time. But it wasn't pork. It wasn't ever pork. Papa Donker Monsterburg's happiness, fully as friendly a citizen, had been feeding the homeless to each other, and had been doing it for years. Needless to say, It wasn't a very Merry Christmas that year in Winstonburg, not for those who know the taste of Papa Donka's pickled pork. In September of 2022, a 20-year-old Australian university student posted a harrowing personal account to the popular social media site. In it, she detailed the terrifying ordeal she'd been subject to after posting intimate pictures of herself on a social media page known as OnlyFans. One involved obsessive stalking, internet loopholes, and ultimately, a clear and present threat to her life. Only through a completely anonymous throwaway account that she feels safe enough to share a story, adding that her local police force had finally taken action against the person responsible. But even then, the girl made it clear that her complaint should have been taken seriously long before she was in any imminent danger. According to the girl, the incidents all started after she moved back with her parents during the summer break. The girl was particularly excited to be home as the family had just bought a new puppy. By all accounts, the girl was having a ball getting to know her new furry friend. But as anyone who's ever had a puppy will tell you, to say they can be erratic would be the understatement of the century. On night, the girl awoke to hear her puppy yelping at the back door. They were in the middle of the potty and went downstairs to let the dog out. She says it was as late as 2 a.m., and there didn't seem to be another soul around as she stepped down into the night, but as soon found out she wasn't entirely alone. I saw this figure in a car, she said. I could tell they were looking at me, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't make out their face. I felt a bit uneasy, but I didn't really think anything of it. Only when I go back inside, the car started up and followed me up my driveway. The terror of such an experience is undeniable, and even though the girl was so close to home, there's no denying that being out alone in the middle of the night made her very vulnerable indeed. I was terrified, the girl added. I sprinted back inside and locked the door and kept my eye out for them in case they tried to break in. But as far as I know, they just backed out the driveway and left. Then she woke up the following morning after a terrible night of restless sleep and deep concern. The girl found an envelope and said her parents left her box. The envelope contained not only 20 Australian dollars in cash, but also her OnlyFans username. I thought long and hard about how he could have found my parents' address, the girl said. Now working out the problem didn't start until I shared my Amazon wish list. OnlyFans and Amazon were both adamant that the security systems prevent leaks from taking place. However, it appeared that wasn't the issue. A third-party seller was not bound to the same data protection laws as large multinational companies. Although she doesn't know for certain how her stalker got her address, the girl is 90% sure that they got in touch with a third-party seller and obtained her home address in that way. Whether it was money, coercion, or intimidation that caused the seller to give up the info is another question entirely, but the fact remains that it's the most likely of all explanations. After that, when I moved back to the college town where I was studying, I stopped posting content. The girl goes on to explain, but somehow my stalker still managed to track me down. The girl said she basically closed down her fans account and started a YouTube account because of how unsafe the former felt. Her first big blogging project was due to be a shopping trip to a local mall, but when she got to her car to depart for the day, she found that she had been ransacked. The vlogging camera was missing too. She said, "I know that's my fault for leaving it in the car, but I was using it the night before, and since I live in a gated area, I didn't think I would be unsafe." That she added that the camera was inside of her glove box and contained an SD card with unreleased photos and videos on it. It was almost like someone knew it was there. But as bad as it was, it only got weirder from there. She eventually contacted her building security personnel asking if they could review security camera footage from the previous few nights, and it was through this that not only did she see a man break into her car and ignore other cars in the parking lot, but she also had proof she was being deliberately singled out for targeted harassment. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex until stopping nearby my window. The girl route. My bedroom faces an outside street and the blinds are broken, so it's very easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my wall into all the way. Look, what I'm trying to say is this person watched me sleep for an hour, so I have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't. The woman explained her camera was later recovered at a nearby secondhand store, suggesting whoever is stalking her has a prior history of criminality. However, she added that the camera's memory card was missing. I know he kept it as some kind of trophy, I just know it. She added and has since moved in hopes his stalker hasn't followed. I believe the police are still trying to track them down, but I have broken my lease and moved to a new place, so hopefully this will keep me safe. But what's so scary about the girl's story is that it seems like only a matter of time before the stalker decides to take things further. Unless they're caught. Stalkers will only ever escalate their activities until their obsession reaches a deadly and permanent end. I was raised over in Little John Island back in Maine. John has a small community of about 100 people just off the coast near Yarmouth. Technically speaking, it's long been incorporated into Yarmouth Township, and all the island kid bus across the bridges to the high schools there. But try telling that to the islanders. We never say we're from Yarmouth when people ask where we're from. We answer Little John every time. Maybe it's the fact that we're cut off by the ocean. Maybe it's just the people who live there. But this strong sense of togetherness and independence on Little John, kind of like a siege mentality only without the siege. As I said, the island kids used to catch the bus across the Talbot Road and the Sandy Point bridges in order to get to school, which included me. It just so happened that my favorite teacher, Coach Collins, was also an islander, and he was my favorite teacher for two reasons. Not only did he teach history and coach the senior ice hockey team, but he was just an all-around nice guy too, and used to give me a ride home after practice. Since walking home during a Maine winter night can almost be downright dangerous. Coach Collins was the kind of guy that kids like me really looked up to. He almost turned pro after playing hockey in college, won a Bronze Star in Vietnam, and unlike many of his colleagues, in a way of talking to his students that made you feel like he was your cool uncle or something. He was the best. No one had a bad word to say about him, and for a long time, Coach Collins occupied some mythical status in the town's collective consciousness. So it's March 7th, 1989. I remember the exact date because Dino Ciccarelli was traded from the Minnesota North Stars to the Washington Capitals. He was the outlaw hockey player for a while, a complete jerk, but God could he shoot a puck. And it was all we talked about at practice at night. Then in the middle of practice, I looked and see my girlfriend's best friend Kelly standing at the edge of the ice. She starts calling me over, and when I get a chance, I skate over to see what she wants. Kelly tells me that my girlfriend wanted me to call her as soon as I got home. From the way Kelly was acting, I knew it wasn't going to be good news. Consequently, I'm totally distracted for the rest of practice. My shooting sucks and I'm in a stinker of a mood. By the time it comes for Coach Collins to give me a ride home like usual, he does his regular approachable patriarch routine. He talks, he dishes out some wholesome advice, and suddenly I'm not catastrophizing so much anymore. I thank him, go inside, call on my girlfriend, and what are you now? She wants to break up. Coach's advice sort of stopped me from having a full-blown teenage heartbreak moment, but I was still upset. Only I couldn't just sit around eating ice cream and feeling sorry for myself. That was masculine upset. I was troubled, so to speak. I figured I'd steal one of my dad's beers and go for a walk in the woods, maybe stand out on Madeline Point looking all broody and such. So that's exactly what I did. Looking back on it, it was just puppy love, no big deal. But as I said, it bruised my ego enough to feel like heartbreak, and that's all that mattered, I suppose. Either way, I found myself wishing I could talk to Coach Collins about it again. A guy like that had seen and experienced so much, and he still managed to come home and start a happy, functional family. He'd know what to say. He'd know what it was I had to do. I'm almost a Madeline Point, and I'm right where there's a kind of fork in the dirt road. One way leads to the water. The other is the overgrown driveway of a long abandoned house. Now the sun hasn't quite set by that time, and there's still a little bit of that blue twilight in the sky, and it gives the rotting old structure this awesomely creepy vibe. So creepy, in fact, that I almost soiled my pants when I heard some car horn let out the short, sharp horn from somewhere real close by. I had no idea anyone else was around. The whole point of walking out that far towards Madeline Point was so I could be on my own. And since the place was normally deserted during the drizzly Maine springtime, I was kinda spooked that anyone was there at all. But by that point, I'm a little buzzed and naturally curious. So I started cautiously padding off down the overgrown driveway, trying to find the source of the honk, when I finally saw the truck that seemed to be parked deliberately out of sight among the trees. I couldn't believe my eyes. Remember how I said I wish I had Coach Collins to talk to, that I could have really used some of that wholesome, cool uncle advice he'd always had on hand? Well, guess what? Like some miraculous act of God, whose truck should I find parked in the trees but Coach Collins? This is weirdly comic moments at first when I'm super happy to see his truck. But I also realize I'm carrying the beer I stole from my dad. I dart back out of sight, toss the beer, then start chomping on the stick to double mint that I've been carrying to get the smell of booze off my breath. I'm just about to come back around the trees for a second time when the passenger door of the coach's truck swings open. I watched as someone basically falls out of it, stumbles through the feet, then leans up against a tree and starts puking. I could tell right away it wasn't Coach Collins. It actually looked like a girl, and it was confirmed when I heard the kind of high-pitched puking sound she made. Okay, I realize that might sound weird, but guys and girls puke different. It is what it is. But anyway, I started straining my eyes to see who it is. Light is getting pretty low at that point, and without being able to see behind the mess of long hair, it was hard to tell exactly who it was. But then I hear Coach Collins saying something from inside the truck. Only it didn't sound like the Coach Collins I knew the back in the truck. Maria. Then I realized who it was. Maria and I had chemistry together. So I had spoke to her once or twice, and she'd been a cheerleader for the longest time until recently dropping out of her squad. Her dropping out of the squad had coincided with a decline in her GPA and an overall odd shift in her behavior. A bunch of rumors went around that ran the spectrum of patiently ridiculous to sinisterly believable, but the truth had remained in the dark. He had something was definitely having a negative effect on Maria. And there came a moment when I realized I might have just found out what that thing was. In among the trees, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, I watched Maria wiping her mouth before the coach yelled something at her from the driver's seat. "Don't make me tell you again, Maria. Get back in the truck." Maria seemed to be fighting back tears, like getting back in the truck was the last thing on earth she wanted to do. Then I literally can't believe what I'm seeing as she turns, tug on her jeans a little that buttons and close. I'm glad I don't have to explain the connotation of that, because even after all these years later, the idea still makes my skin crawl. Only as Maria turns, I must have been leaning too far out from the tree I'm using for cover, because there's this one horrible moment where we both just lock eyes for a second. I assume I'm busted, so I start edging away before breaking into a run back toward Cousin Street. As I'm running, I keep expecting to hear the truck revving its engine, either to follow me or take off to avoid being seen again. But nothing happens. I just run and run and run until I reach the Talbot Road bridge that led back to Little John and home. Once I was home and had calmed down a bit, I started to wonder why I ran in the first place. I know it sounds horrible. In retrospect, the way Coach was talking to Maria should have told me everything I needed to know. There was a lack of empathy that she was vomiting, not to mention the question why she was vomiting in the first place. But I was young, scared, and embarrassingly drunk off of one beer, so I tried to rationalize. I didn't even really see Coach Collins, and it's possible that someone else in the area owned a truck the same model as his. Sure, the voice sounded like him, but that didn't mean it was. Besides, if something shady was going on, surely Maria would have told me since she'd seen me and all. But thinking of it, had she seen me? Maybe I just imagined she had. And if they were doing something awful, why not speed off or give chase? There was a lot that I could interpret as being totally harmless, but there was a disturbing amount that indicated that what I had seen was something very, very wrong. But then, what was had to be do about it? Accuse Coach Collins, the small-town war hero, a father, a husband, the best hockey coach in the Northeast, of being a freaking predator? That was unthinkable to me. What if I accused him and there was a perfectly reasonable explanation? I'd be a pariah. I wouldn't be able to show my face around town, let alone at hockey practice. The same hockey practice I love had and he coached? I'm sorry to ramble. I just need you to understand my mindset about it and why I kept so quiet about the whole thing for like a straight week. I know it was the wrong play. And to everyone reading this, especially to Maria, and sorry, you just have to understand. I figure if anything was going to go down, it'd be the next day at school. Maybe Maria would confront me about spying on her or something. I had no idea. Everything was still so unclear at the time, hence my hesitancy to act on it. But nothing happened. No one said anything. Coach Collins passed me in the hallway and just said morning like he normally did. I tried to act normal about it. I tried to push it all way in the back of my mind. But I've never been very good at hiding the way I feel. I know people notice the change in my attitude. Mother weekend, my mom was asking why I was being so quiet. I told her I was just tired, but I guess it's because it's the only thing I wanted to talk about was off limits. I especially couldn't act the same around Coach Collins, and it was only when I went to check out his truck after school that I got any sense of reassurance. I noticed that there was this big Support Our Troops sticker on his back bumper, something I didn't remember seeing on the trunk in the woods that day. But as much as I tried to ignore it, the fact remains that I simply may not have noticed it at the time, because understandably I was very much distracted by other events. But still, I kept my mouth shut, and actually took a few more days before I actually did anything about it. The day I broke was exactly a week after the event for 7 nights straight. All I thought about before I drifted off into an uneasy sleep was the possibility of Coach Collins being the voice in the truck, of how if he was doing something seriously evil to Maria right under the noses of everyone in town, then I had to do something about it. I wouldn't be able to live with myself otherwise. So I decided to approach Maria. I couldn't just ask who she was with promise to keep my mouth shut and live with the consequences. I didn't have to drop Coach Collins' name, and I could just gauge her reaction to the question. And when I looked at it like that, it seemed all easy and simple. I mean, she told me if she needed help, right? And that's what I did. I came up with Maria after chemistry one afternoon, asked if I could talk to her in private, apologized for what I was about to ask, then just hit her with it. Who were you with near the power station last week? The way she looked at me at first made me think she was about to just deny it. This mocking and crazy kind of look. I cut her off with, I know as you I saw you. And you saw me too. I just need to know who you were with. After that, all her bluster just melted away, and the confident ex-cheerleader began to look like a scared little girl. No one, she said, and just walked off towards lockers. I tried one more time to talk to her about it, but as she walked past me in the school parking lot, all she had to say to me was leave me alone. That was the crushing moment that I realized that my worst fears had come true. And then nothing about little John could ever be the same for me ever again. The trouble was, I was at something of an impasse. Even if I did tell the cops about the coach, she'd have to actually want to talk to someone about it. Otherwise, all I had was a baseless accusation that might ruin my life completely. If I was going to do anything, it needed to be well planned and delicately executed. But just what that was, I had no idea at the time. And the week since I saw Murray in the woods, I had skipped hockey practice twice. And the times I showed up, I ducked Coach Collins when he asked me about my usual ride home. But that evening, when I fumbled for some excuse about going over to a friend's house to study, he said something that made my stomach tie itself into a knot. "Get in the truck." The tone was almost the exact same as he had been in the woods previously. If there was any doubt still left in my mind, there wasn't after that. Part of me wanted to just get in the truck and go back to pretending like I hadn't seen anything. Or if I did, it was all perfectly explainable. But the other part of me, the rational part, told me that getting in Coach Collins' truck was a very, very bad idea. I told him no. Nothing else. Just one solitary no. And what followed were a few moments of silence as I saw a look come over the coach's face that I'd never seen before. He became cold, expressionless, and only later did it occur to me that what I was looking at might have been the last thing one or two Viet Cong guerrillas saw before. "You know?" Then he spoke. "Have you got something you want to ask me, son?" I just shook my head. "Good. Because being so close to graduating, it would be a shame if anything were to keep you from your studies, wouldn't?" He said, and waited for a response, and I didn't say a thing in reply. "Kid like you has a lot of potential. You can enroll in some fancy college across the country, get some well-paid big city job, and just leave little John behind. Never look back. You understand me?" The horrible thing was, I didn't understand. I heard what he said, and I saw the appeal, but I hated him. I felt betrayed, and I wanted everyone to know he was a liar, a cheat, and a predator. So after a week of doing nothing, I finally went home and told my mom I know it was something I should have done a week prior. It was obvious just from how tactful she knew how to handle the situation. She drove over to Maria's house, talked to Maria's mom, and private, she was quick to add. Then the pair of them approached Maria and just, I didn't even know, used their mom magic to just coax it out of her. But the time she got home around 10, just 3 hours after she left, she said Maria and her mom were ready to go to the police. Only the thing is, unlike Hollywood movies where there's usually some big resolution and everyone gets their just desserts, etc., this story doesn't have a real end to it. Coach Collins was questioned by police, but since the DEA or judge, whoever, didn't think there was enough evidence to push for a trial, the coach was never arrested or charged with anything. Maria, on the other hand, died in a car accident where the other driver was twice over the legal limit. Just smashed into her and her sister while they were coming back from Portland one night. It was a horrific tragedy and meant that whatever secrets Maria had went to her grave with her. But the cherry on top is not only was Coach Collins never punished for what he did, but he was right about me. I went into a college on Seattle, ended up getting a job here in Oregon. Mom and Dad moved into Portland as they got older. So I've not been back to Little John in almost 20 years now, and honestly, I'd like to keep it that way. I can't stand small towns in general anymore. My wife thinks that's cutesy and kitsch, but only because she grew up in Chicago. Me, I know how small towns work. I know they all have dark secrets buried just below the surface. But unlike big cities where bad things happen all the time, people just don't see it. In small towns, people know all about the bad things, and it's not that they can't see it, they just choose not to.
I was 17 at that time. and I need to give you a little background. It was 80s and before cell phones. I'm a female, and I had a best friend at my high school who I'll call C for short. C and I met when her brother asked me to be his girlfriend, and she didn't like me at first. She would walk around me and taunt me, but once I stood up to her, she began to respect me and then got to know me properly. Now, because I knew her and her brother, it was a very short-lived romance. I spent a lot of time hanging around at their house, and C also had a young twin brothers, her mom and her older male cousin who lived in the house. Over the time, I became close friends with the family, and her mother even offered me a job. She sold beautiful clothes via fashion shows and asked me to be a model. I really enjoyed that job and the friendship I made. Then one night, she asked me to spend the night, which I hadn't done before, so I said yes. But I couldn't get a ride to her house until it was already pretty late, and my ride dropped me off, and rather than waiting to see if I got in safely, just drove away. Walking up to the house, it was completely dark and quiet, and when I knocked, no one came to the door. I knocked again, and still nothing. I was stuck there and had to get someone to wake up and let me in. And I was beginning to get scared. There were a couple of other houses on the street, but for some reason, they were all dark and quiet too. I walked about a quarter of a mile down the dark, deserted street to a payphone, and I dialed C's number. After several rings, she eventually answered and unlocked the door for me. As I walked back to her house from the phone booth, she went back to the bed, and I went into the house. It was as dark as quiet inside as it was outside, and I made my way to her room, where I thought I was going to be sleeping, but she had fallen back to sleep and locked her bedroom door. Her young twin brothers were still awake and invited me to sleep in their room, as they had 2 sets of bunk beds, so each twin had his own bed with an extra for the older cousin. I didn't see the other brother, my former boyfriend, that night at all. That was a fine situation for me, as I liked the twins, who were about 9 years old. So I lay in one of the bottom bunks, and I was ready to sleep. The boys were talking like kids do, and they were fine, but the older cousin was in there as well, I believe in the bunk above me. But they never turned on the light, so I wasn't really sure. Now, while the twins talked and giggled about nothing, the cousin, who was at least 20, maybe older, began making very inappropriate comments to me, which in pitch blackness was all the more unsettling, because I couldn't see where he even was in the room. At first, I ignored him, thinking he was just being a dick. But he persisted. It didn't matter to him that the 2 young boys were in the same room either, and he got more and more explicit in saying the things he wanted to do with me. I was really creeped out by this point, but I still didn't think he would actually do anything. I kept asking him to stop talking to me like that, but he wouldn't. It just escalated, and I couldn't tell he was going to leave me alone, so I finally got up and walked out of the room, still in the dark, and I made my way to my friend's room right across the hall. I knocked on her bedroom door. When she didn't make a sound, I could see that C was a very deep sleeper, and her door was still locked. This entire time, the cousin kept talking and scaring me, and as I frantically tried to wake my friend, he began getting out of his bunk and coming towards the hall where I was. I had to do something fast. For some reason, C's mom wasn't home that night. But since I had spent so much precious time in that house, I knew it pretty well. I knew that there was a den right there next to the room that I had been in with the boys, and I knew that den door was locked. Just as the cousin reached me in the hallway, I screamed a little, ran into the den and slammed the door in his face, immediately turning the lock all in one motion. That room was even darker, so the first thing I wanted to do was to turn on the light, but I couldn't find one anywhere. I searched for the light because I wanted to push something else in front of the door, knowing that the little door lock was not a strong one. But I couldn't find light anywhere, and within about 2 minutes, I could hear the cousin fiddling with the locks. He got it open so fast, he might as well have used a key. So now he had me where he wanted me, and he quickly closed and relocked the door. We were now completely alone in the dark room, with nowhere around to stop him. The twins had stayed in their beds throughout, and there was nothing they could have done anyway. This guy then very quickly grabbed me towards him, putting one hand over my mouth and nose so I could neither scream nor breathe very well. His other hand went right between my legs, and he was touching me in my most private place, as I was at his mercy and barely breathing. He quietly said things in my ears as I struggled to breathe and somehow defend myself. He was behind me, and his arms were wrapped around mine in such a way that I couldn't use them. I'd been in a similar situation with a man in my not-so-distant past, so this time I was angry. I did not want to do this to happen to me again. He went on for a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity. And just when I thought I'd run out of hope, miraculously there was a knock on the door of the den. It was my friend C. She hadn't woken up when I was pounding on her bedroom door, but some kind of divine interventions had somehow caused her to wake up now. "What's going on in there?" she asked. The man tightened his grip on my mouth and nose so they couldn't make a sound. And he said to her, "We're okay, we're okay." And here I tried all my might to at least make some kind of sound. But since I couldn't get a breath in, I couldn't manage it. I will forever be eternally grateful for my friend C at that moment, as she didn't just go back to the bed thinking I was messing around with her cousin. Instead, she said that she wanted to hear me say I was okay, and that's when the cousin knew he had lost and let go of me. I immediately screamed, "Help me!" and I ran into her bedroom with her falling behind me. She then closed and locked the bedroom door. I was gasping for air, crying and trying to tell her everything that had happened. She had trouble calming me down, as I was still terrified, and I told her that he could pick her lock if he wanted to, and would come in and get me. She promised that she wouldn't let that happen, and much later, I was somehow able to fall asleep. In the morning, I woke up instantly, afraid of remembering what had happened the night before, and C wasn't in the room with me. I panicked for a moment, thinking the cousin was still somewhere in the house, but after a moment, I had my friend talking with her mom, who had arrived back home. I joined them at the table and learned that C had already filled her mom in on everything. Her mom told me she was sorry about what had happened, and that morning she had already thrown the cousin out of the house, and that he would never be allowed to come back. At that moment, I had been certain I was going to report it, as I hadn't reported my previous assault, because I felt like it had somewhat been my fault, and I didn't want anyone to find out about it. I was still struggling with the decision, but this time I was angry, and I did not deserve to have that happen to me. These people had felt like my second family for a while, and that mom was my boss at the job I enjoyed very much. I didn't want to hurt them, and I certainly didn't want to jeopardize my relationship with the mom and my job. The most important thing was, though, is this time. I knew none of it had been my fault, and I knew my worth. I realized that no matter what a woman does, nothing gave a man the right to force himself upon her. And I had gained quite a bit of strength through this experience. So the point was not whether I'd reported the incident or not. I'm going to leave that part up to you, the reader, to decide. To all women, even men, that I recommend carrying a pepper spray in a stun gun, as I do now. I won't get into discussion about guns, but you can still stop an attacker, even a dog or a bear, even from a distance of up to 4 yards with pepper spray, and up close you can disable them with a stun gun and get away safely without killing anyone. My wish for everyone listening this is to please stay safe and be aware of your surroundings.
Rebecca Lucille Schaefer was born in Eugene, Oregon on November 6, 1967. Her father, Dr. Benson Schaefer, was a child psychologist, while her mother was a writer and instructor at Portland Community College. Given how proud she was of her Jewish roots, young Rebecca would dream of becoming a rabbi. But after a chance encounter with a modeling agent, she began modeling clothes during her junior year in high school. Rebecca would become a popular subject of many photographers, and she made guest appearances, department store catalogs, and television commercials, as well as an extra in a straight-to-TV movie. She was so successful that in August of 1984, her parents gave her permission to move to New York City to pursue a full-time modeling career. At 5'7", she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling jobs and struggled to find work as a result. Rebecca even moved to Japan for a short stint in the hopes of finding work there, but found Japanese modeling standards were even stricter than back in the United States. Yet, within just a few months of moving back to New York, Rebecca landed her first TV role playing Amy Barnes in ABC's One Life to Live. The following year, she appeared on the cover of 17 magazine, which caught the attention of television producers who were casting for a sitcom called My Sister Sam. Through a series of grueling auditions, Rebecca won the role of Patricia Russell, and the series was initially a hit, but it was canceled halfway through its second season in 1988 due to failing ratings. The role established Rebecca's acting career and earned her several other roles in a variety of different productions. However, the role also brought her to the attention of an extremely dangerous and unstable young man, one that would have an indelible and catastrophic impact on her life, Robert John Bardo. The youngest of 7 children, Bardo was the son of a non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force who had met his mother whilst deployed in Japan. Due to the nature of his father's occupation, the Bardo family moved frequently, eventually settling in Tucson, Arizona in 1983. And to say young Robert had a rough childhood would barely broach the issue. A young Robert was placed in foster care after abuse from one of his siblings got so bad that he threatened to take his own life. Couple that with the Bardo's family history of mental illness, and it's quite clear that he never really had a shot at emotionally stable adulthood. By the age of 15, Bardo had been institutionalized to treat severe emotional problems, and it was around then that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Shortly after, he dropped out of Pueblo Magnet High School and began working as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box restaurant. By the time he was 19, he had been arrested 3 times for disorderly conduct. Bardo's neighbors would frequently complain that he exhibited unexplainably strange and threatening behavior towards them. Yet, it seems they had no idea how deep Bardo's madness extended. You see, Bardo had a dangerously obsessive personality and found himself increasingly obsessed with certain female celebrities. The first target of his dangerous obsession was with the 13-year-old Samantha Smith, an American schoolgirl, peace activist, and child actress from Manchester, Maine, who became famous during the Cold War after her death on August 25, 1985, Bar Harbor Airlines Flight 1808 plane crash. Bardo was devastated, but it was during a period of intense mourning that he discovered Rebecca Schaefer while watching My Sister Sam. After writing Rebecca numerous letters confessing his love for her, Bardo attempted to gain access to the set of My Sister Sam, who was turned away by security. It was then that Bardo turned to a terrifyingly creative method of discovering Rebecca's whereabouts. Bardo contacted a Los Angeles-based private detective agency, promising to pay them handsomely if they could obtain the address of one Rebecca Schaefer. Using the California Department of Motor Vehicles records, the private detectives successfully obtained Rebecca's address, passing it along to Bardo for a tidy sum. They had no idea how unhinged Bardo was, or what the ramifications of their actions were. They were soon to find out just how irresponsible they had truly been. On July 18, 1989, Bardo drove to Los Angeles to confront Rebecca at her home. He was angry because she hadn't bothered to reply to any of his letters, but not only that, he was furious because she appeared in a raunchy love scene in the movie scene from The Class Struggle and Beverly Hills. Bardo allegedly told Rebecca that she'd lost her innocence, and then in partaking in such an impure movie scene, had become just another Hollywood harlot. He entered this bizarre tirade by assuring her that he was a big fan. Now all he wanted was the best for her. Rebecca was terrified and told Bardo she wanted nothing to do with him, slamming the door in his face and rushing to call the police. They assured Rebecca they'd come over to her as soon as they could. But the situation wasn't an emergency at the moment, and no lights or sirens were rushing to her apartment. In the meantime, a heartbroken Bardo walked over to a nearby diner to get some breakfast. His plan to win over Rebecca had failed, but he also had a plan B, which he would use in the event of Rebecca's rejection. About an hour later, Rebecca's apartment doorbell rang again. Assuming it was the cops, she rushed over to answer the door, but when she stopped to open it, the only person she saw standing before her was Robert Bardo. Bardo raised a Ruger 357 handgun and shot Rebecca through the heart. He then tossed a copy of Catcher in the Rye into her apartment and was later arrested in Tucson while wandering through traffic. The following year, Bardo tried to argue that he was criminally insane, but a judge dismissed the idea and labeled him a dangerously obsessive but otherwise mentally competent person. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and is currently serving his sentence at California's Avenue State Prison. As a consequence of Bardo's actions and his methods of obtaining Schaefer's address, the U.S. Congress passed the Driver Privacy Protection Act, which prohibits the State Department of Motor Vehicles from disclosing the home addresses of state residents. Rebecca's murder also prompted the first anti-stalking state laws, including the California Penal Code 6469, which was essentially the nation's first law against obsessive or fixated persons. It was a nice gesture, but few deny that they came too little, too late for Rebecca, who needed protection from a dangerous and violent stalker long before there were any legal means to combat them. We can only hope these laws are direct and robust enough to stop the same thing from happening again. But given the determination of the human spirit, that seems like wishful thinking indeed.
Custer County, Oklahoma, a small county of not so diverse people. It's not the very lavish town that people think it is, and probably isn't the richest. One would say that what people have here is a life paced, slow, and easy when it comes to all the shenanigans life is about now. Now, this story dates back to the night of the prom in '89 in Custer County High School. It wasn't the very best school that one would think of. The class of '89, on the other hand, was the most promising class that the school has ever had. It was the academic and the social peak that the class of '89 brought to the Custer County. And in general, it was the four friends who were the bright, young, charming minds of Custer County. The future faces of the place that made everyone proud of their little town. Frank Abigail Jr., son of a single father. His mother died of lung cancer at a very young age, and he grew up with his father, a great man making an honest living as a physics teacher, and the very source of all the academic brilliance that Frank Jr. was praised for. Frank Jr. wanted to be an astronomer and work for NASA, exploring other worlds and studying stars. Now, on the contrary, there was Christian. The bond that Frank Jr. and Christian held was stronger than that of blood. They were friends, but they were stronger than any pair of brothers could. The only difference was Christian was deep-rooted. He loved the very dirt he walked on. He wanted to be a farmer and was highly involved with his father in all the farming and agriculture. He always was deep-rooted. Frank and Christian spent a whole lot of time together, and their friendship dated back to the very first time that Franks came into the town. Together, they celebrated their achievements, and together, they went through all the grief. The county people knew that Frank and Christian cannot be found anywhere separated. They were always together, and their friendship was an example of character. But it wasn't just Frank and Christian. Their bond was shared along with Claire and Doug. Claire and Doug were the power couple of Custer County High School, and together, these four were the most popular students of the school, and to everyone's surprise, kindest and most helpful too. Claire was the only daughter of the industrialist of the town, and Doug the son of the editor of the local Custer County newspaper. Despite the confrontations and differences of thoughts between both their parents, Claire and Doug were very much in love and were ready to spend their whole life together. Doug was about to go to New York to follow into his father's footprint and become a journalist, and Claire just wanted to be with him. It was the night of the prom of '89, the biggest event in their life, and every single student in Custer High was pretty excited about it. It was the last prom for Frank and his friends. After this, they were all moving to college, and probably not be together for a long time. It was an emotional and a really special night for all of them. They all gathered together at Claire's house and went together to the prom. Despite their kind nature and goodness, their friendship was loathed by many. They all arrived at prom, and it was magical, with the lights and the music. The prom seemed like a perfect send-off to their old life, and a great welcome party for the new transitions that they were about to get into. They all started dancing, and Doug noticed that one of their classmates was being pushed in by Riley. Riley was the typical bully, and he was also the mayor's only son, so nobody messed with him, not even the teachers. Doug saw Riley pushing over a kid out of the hall, so he decided to follow them, and Frank, Christian, and Claire, as usual, followed Doug. They soon left the hall and entered the gallery. Following Doug, they were all behind the school's canteen and outside of school. Doug confronted, as Riley was busy harassing the boy. Frank Jr., Christian, and Claire followed. Now they all gathered in the empty parking lot of the school. It was dark, and the loud noise of music was muffled into the silence of the night outside. They confronted Riley and his friends, and somehow managed to stop them from bullying the poor kid. They went back to the party, but Riley and his friends were pissed. They decided to take revenge on Doug and his friends. The prom was at its peak, and they were waiting for the opportunity. And they soon got one. They snuck into the ladies' washroom and waited behind closed doors for Claire to come. As soon as she entered, they all jumped on her and held her mouth shut and grabbed her. Riley came in close and forcefully kissed her and grabbed her from behind. Emily, one of the classmates of Claire, entered the washroom and saw that she walked away from the scene and ran to tell it to Doug and alert the authorities. Doug, Frank, and Christian ran towards the washroom and barged in. Riley was forcefully kissing her as Claire was crying and trying to break free. They barged in and fight broke in, and they started fighting. And soon, the authorities were alerted and the prom got canceled. Even after Claire's statement, Riley was not convicted for the charges of sexual assault and attempt of rape. Claire was traumatized by the whole incident and wallowed more and more into the darkness, but her friends were always by her side. Doug held her and loved her even more, and Christian and Frank stood by her side every second. Seeing Riley walk free made all of them angry, and they decided that they shall punish Riley instead, and they will become the law if the law doesn't help them. They were witnessing that the fact that Riley was not convicted made him even more confident about his invincibility and lacking a justice system. They devised a plan to put an end to this before leaving the town. They made a fake invitation for a party at the Foss Reservoir and made sure that Riley and his friends got that. After confirming, they waited at the three-way junction for all of them to arrive. It was a night, and Riley and his friends were driving across the three-way junction. As soon as they were about to take the turn away from Foss Reservoir, a truck collided with them with the force, and their car was pushed towards the edges. Riley's friend, who was on the front passenger seat, died on the first impact. Riley was able to make out the face of the driver. It was Claire, and Doug was right there beside her. And on the rear, it was Frank and Christian. Claire pulled the reverse, and with another impact, the car went on to drop into the reservoir, along with every single one of them. Claire, Doug, Frank, and Christian stepped out of the car to see if there were any survivors. They stepped down to the ridge to find that Riley made it out of the car on time, and he was ducking on the ridge. They all started chasing Riley, and wounded and in shock, Riley started running. After 15 minutes, they were able to corner him. That is when Doug hit Riley, and Frank and Christian held him. Claire took out the blade from the car and went on closer to Riley and stabbed him in the scrotum. Riley was crying in pain. On his knees, his hands were between his legs, and he was pleading and begging. Doug took out a recorder and told him to confess all the things that he has done, and to confess everything that his father did to protect him. And it was the only way that Riley would walk out of there alive. Without hesitation, Riley confessed to everything. Even Claire, Doug, Frank, and Christian were disgusted by all the things that he had done, and were disappointed that his father let him walk away from all these crimes. They told him to stand up and walk away. As Riley was walking away, they looked at each other, and after a while, noise of a big splash was heard around, as if someone had jumped into the reservoir. The next few days, a copy of the tape of Riley's confession was sent to different media outlets in and outside Oklahoma. The missing report of Riley and his friends was now piled under the controversy of his father, and all the arrests and paperwork that it brought them. 20 years later, a diver found a car rusted away in the depth of Foss River. and in it were the skeleton of Riley and his friends. What remains a big mystery is how did the body of Riley end up in the car? Claire and Doug got married, moved to England, and are still living there with their 2 daughters. Frank Abigail Jr. went on to become an astronaut at NASA. While I am still living in Oklahoma, I found my love for storytelling, and now I am the chief editor at the local newspaper in Custer High.
When I was about 11, I had this friend of a friend called Alex. He was 6 or 7 years older than us, but was a major nerd and had no friends that were his age. He would just constantly show up and would try to play with us. But honestly, I think my friend was just inviting him behind our backs and playing dumb to the rest of us. Needless to say though, I didn't really like him, and we would constantly argue and talk badly to each other, and never got physical besides the tackle that was a little too hard or just pushing each other around a bit. But after a while, for some reason, we both kinds of clicked with each other at one point and just stopped arguing. Well, we weren't going for each other's throats anymore anyway. But for the first time after a long time, I went to Alex's house and his mom greeted us. She seemed very nice but very passive and almost submissive. We sat down and talked to her for a bit. Then we listened to some music and played on the Xbox. Then my dad telephoned me, so I left Alex's room to go to the kitchen, sit down, and take the call. Then suddenly I heard the door open and saw the 662, 150-pound, not buff, but definitely not fat, bald man standing in the doorway. We made eye contact, and he looked at me with pure disgust that I was sitting at his kitchen table. Then he said, "Who the hell are you?" He had this look in his eyes that was almost predator-like, and I was his prey. I froze and didn't say a word. "Are you going to make me repeat myself, boy?" he growled. Alex had now come from his room and explained to his dad who I was. "Okay, well, get them the hell out of my house. You know better than to have friends here on weekdays while me and your mom go to work." I left in a hurry, and I'm not lying when I say that. I've never felt like that ever again. I can't really explain it. It wasn't really fair, but more of you're in danger vibe. Needless to say, I never went inside his house again. Fast forward a few months later, and Alex and I didn't really talk as much as we did. Alex had apparently gotten rejected by one of our mutual female friends, and he had then decided to break a 6-foot dollhouse over the girl's head. She had to go to the hospital and get 9 staples because of it, and there was a possibility she would lose her eye. Understandably, I heard that an adult male had hit my 15-year-old friend, so at that point, I just snapped and wanted to fight this guy because of it. But he was 18, and I was still loving. I called him 40 times and left a voicemail after voicemail, telling him I was going to kill him. I got arrested for this, even at age 11. I know it wasn't the smartest idea. And I told him to come to fight me, and screamed at him, telling him to hit me like he'd hit her. I'd actually walked to his house and were standing on the sidewalk, still calling out to him. He finally picked up, though. I just carried on screaming at him to come out and fight me. He was silent the whole time, but I could tell the phone was on speaker. Alex hung up the phone and I thought he was going to come out to fight me, but he never did. His dad came out instead and said the police were on their way, and if you step on this grass, I'll kill you. Stop calling my son, and we will have problems. I never told the cops that his dad had threatened me because honestly, I was freaking out about it. But now I had to explain to my family that I was getting arrested for threatening an 18-year-old while I was 11. I ended up with a few charges and was told that if I made any more contact, I'd end up in juvie. Again, this was because of a child threatening an adult. I was eventually forced into court, though, because my family wanted to drag me through the process as punishment. I think they only did this in an attempt to set me straight, like that TV show. But here's where the story takes a wild twist. 2 weeks before our court date, Alex's father was charged with a cold case of rape and murder. Alex's dad and his best friend had taken the friend's girlfriend out to a bar, drugged her repeatedly, then raped her. Then they beat her to death, to the point where she'd had multiple skull fractures, and even a part of her skull had been caved in. Then they took her to a bike trail and left her there to be found in the morning. And they did all this with no real concern of getting caught. This shocked the hell out of me. But what really scared me was his dad, and the times he'd said, "I'll kill you if you touch the grass, or we will have problems," etc. Normally I would have thought it was all just BS, but from him, I think it was never a threat. It was a promise. And it scares me to even think about the voicemails I'd left. And I honestly feel blessed that he hadn't come after my family, since he'd already shown to have little remorse or care for another human's life. When we got to court, Alex was staring at the man who just put his dad away for life. And there was little discussion about my charges. And Alex had never saved the voicemails anyway, so all charges of me were dropped. The next morning, Alex and his mom packed up and moved. I haven't seen them again since. Alex never got charged for assaulting the girl, because there was never a police report made. The girl had begged her parents to tell the doctors it was an accident, so the police had no idea about what had happened, until I told them why I threatened Alex in the first place.